Do you think time heals all wounds, or some never close?
Are you ready for a shocking truth? I learned the hard way that in my family, love always came with a receipt, only the balance was never in my favor. Yesterday, I was the reliable daughter, the one they counted on for everything from rides to paperwork, from paying a bill that slipped their mind to making sure my grandmother's doctor appointments were lined up. Today, I am the woman who decided to stop being their safety net, and you would not believe how quickly everything started to unravel once I refused to keep playing that role. When I tell people my parents took my brother on a luxury trip and left me forgotten, they sometimes assume I am exaggerating or leaving details out. But the truth is simple and brutal. They spent thousands on him, announced it proudly in a family group text, and never once acknowledged that I was not invited, not remembered, not even asked if I could come along. They justified it by calling it a reward for him finishing a work project, as if the rest of us live our lives without effort. I had just finished a grueling stretch of double shifts at my job, but apparently that was not worthy of recognition. This was not new. Growing up, I was the one who held things together while he got the spotlight. When the cable bill was forgotten after I moved out, it was still in my name, so I paid it to protect my credit. When my mom needed a ride to an outpatient procedure, I took the day off while Chase sent a good luck text. When groceries ran low before Thanksgiving, I swiped my card, cooked half the meal, and washed every dish, while my parents loudly praised Chase for helping with dessert because he bought a pie from Costco. These things piled up, not just in cost, but in weight. I started to keep mental tabs, and eventually I wrote them down. The tank of gas here, the groceries there, the copays I covered because my mom swore she would Venmo me later, and never did. Over years, it turned into real money. I had spreadsheets on my computer that looked more like I was running a side business than being part of a family. I told myself it was fine, because families don't keep score. But then they sent me a selfie from Paris with champagne glasses raised, thanking Chase for bringing so much joy into their lives, and the switch flipped. I sat down and pulled up every bank statement, every Venmo request, every text confirming I had covered something. I realized that if I had billed them at even minimum wage for my hours of driving, organizing, and caregiving, the total would be higher than the price of that luxury trip. And I was done swallowing it. So I did something I never thought I would. I created an invoice. It was not a rant, not a pity letter, not even emotional. It was professional. I itemized mileage, grocery receipts, copays, missed work hours, even the subscription services they had tied to my card without asking. I added late fees for anything more than a year old. The total made my stomach twist, not because I expected to see the money, but because it proved to me that I had been subsidizing my own erasure. I attached it to an email with a short message. Going forward, I only do paid work or family favors that go both ways. Please settle the balance by the due date. Then, with my hands shaking, I hit send. But that was not all. I also logged into the utility accounts that were still under my name, accounts I had left open years ago because my parents insisted it was easier for billing. I set both to terminate in 2 weeks after sending them the notice. If they wanted lights and water, they could open accounts in their own names like adults. By the time their plane took off, I had already done what they never expected. I stopped being silent. And almost immediately, the cracks began to show. The first sign came as a push alert from my bank, an attempted charge from the family's shared mobile plan. I had honestly forgotten I was still paying for 2 lines they never transferred out of my account. It was only a few dollars, but the symbolism nearly made me laugh out loud. Here they were, sipping champagne at the top of the Eiffel Tower, and back home the autopay they had relied on for years had just been cut off. That night, I opened my laptop and started making a list of every account, every password, every recurring charge they might try to slide under my radar. I was not angry anymore, not even sad. I felt focused, sharper than I had in years. Because I knew that when the autopay stopped, so would the illusion that love meant silently carrying everyone else's weight. And here is the part you will not believe. The very next day, before they even landed back in the States, I received 3 frantic voicemails from Chase. Not apologies. Not explanations. Just panic. Hey, did you change something with the phone plan? None of us can get data, and mom is freaking out. Call me back now. I did not call back. I did something else instead, something that set the stage for everything that followed. And that, more than anything, proved I was no longer their fallback plan. When the frantic voicemails from Chase stacked up like unpaid parking tickets that were never actually mine, I realized the universe had just handed me a neat little lever, because if a single line item on a phone plan could send the family into a spin, then the entire structure of quiet, invisible labor I had kept running for years was holding up far more than I let myself admit, and I was done being flattered by words like dependable and resilient when what they really meant was predictable and available on demand. I logged into the carrier account, stared at the screen that still showed my card attached to lines that did not belong to me, and felt the kind of steadiness you only get when you stop explaining yourself to people who are committed to not hearing you. Then I ported my number to a new carrier under my sole name, removed every extra line, turned off international roaming that I had never approved, and sent the dullest, most effective message in the family group chat that I have ever written. A single paragraph that said my cards were no longer connected to any shared accounts, that my number had changed, and that if anyone needed me they could use the new contact, which I placed there without apology, without commentary, and without the nervous little jokes I used to add to soften the blow of basic boundaries. I expected blowback, and of course it arrived in the usual pattern, a sugar-coated text from my mother about how this felt sudden and out of character, layered with the suggestion that I was tired and overwhelmed and perhaps making decisions too quickly. Which was a familiar script meant to recast clarity as instability, but I kept my responses short and factual, because I was not making a scene, I was making a change, and changes do not need permission to be valid. Then something small but important happened that told me I was not losing my mind. An aunt reached out privately with a message that could have been a pressure valve releasing in my chest. She said thank you for saying what no one says. That she had watched the way my effort got repackaged as family luck and how Chase's bare minimum got broadcast as a triumph, and she admitted she had kept quiet to keep the peace, which is exactly how the peace kept costing me money, time, and the feeling that I was not crazy to want even exchanges where grown adults carry their own weight. A little later, I saw a separate text from Hannah, who will marry my brother if she does not see the pattern clearly enough before the wedding, and she was careful and kind in a way that told me she knows more than she wants to admit. She wrote that she had noticed I did a lot of planning and paying and driving, and that if I ever needed a witness to how things actually worked behind the scenes, she would tell the truth, which I tucked away because it mattered less in that moment for courtrooms, and more for my sanity to know at least one person in the inner circle had their eyes open. With the phone plan cleaned up and my number finally mine, I moved to the next leak, which was the endless stream of event planning that always landed in my lap under the heading of "You are just so good at logistics." So when Chase texted me a breezy note about his engagement dinner and how it would be amazing if I could coordinate the venue, the menu, the photos, the invitations, and the surprise slideshow because apparently I had a gift, I felt the old reflex flare up for half a second. The one that says, just do it to keep the peace, and then I shut it down and sent him a tidy reply with the contact information of a reliable coordinator who charges market rates, along with a list of line items I used to quietly cover that would now need deposits and invoices, because if people want a grown-up party, they can have grown-up costs, and if they want a sister to run a full production, they can ask for a quote rather than an apology. He reacted with confusion and the standard guilt script, the one where I am accused of making things transactional in a family, which made me laugh out loud in my kitchen because they had made it transactional the day they turned my goodwill into a line of credit and my calendar into a service desk, and I typed back that I love celebrations when they are not built on one person's exhaustion, that I was happy to attend if it was paid for and organized by the people who wanted it, and that I was not available to manage or subsidize the work, which ended the debate because there is no argument strong enough to reattach someone else's bill to a card you have already cut in half. By midday, I was on a roll, so I pulled a clean sheet of paper and started a list labeled Leaks to Seal, and I wrote down every account that might still carry my name, every login that had been shared and never reclaimed, Every room where a spare key might be hanging with my tag on it like a dog collar for a pet they thought would keep returning, and I worked my way through in a rhythm that felt almost clinical, changing passwords, revoking access, removing authorized user privileges, and leaving behind a trail of small, boring confirmations that together said the same thing in 100 different ways, which is that I no longer belonged to their convenience. What surprised me most was not the panic from abroad or the passive-aggressive nudge from my mother. It was how quickly removing money and access pulled the curtain back on a story I had told myself to survive, because once the autopay shut off, I could see how many thank yous were really just another way to keep me compliant, how many compliments masked an expectation that I would bend again, and how many sighs of relief had been purchased with my credit score and my weekends, which is a trade I would never make for a stranger and should never have made for family. In the late afternoon, after I had completed the last account removal and was considering whether to take a walk or just sit in the quiet that finally felt like mine, my phone buzzed with a voicemail notification that came in on the new number, which meant they had already started chasing me across channels, and I pressed play to hear my mother's voice doing that soft, controlled thing she does when she is about to bulldoze me with a smile, telling me that she understood I was feeling hurt and that the trip for Chase had been planned for months and that I should not ruin the mood with money talk, and that we would discuss it when they returned, because apparently everything serious becomes a conversation only when she sets the time and the terms. And while she spoke, I forwarded the file straight to my attorney friend with a subject line that said boundary push incoming, because if we were going to have a discussion, it would happen on paper, not over a kitchen island where I would be expected to cave. I ended the day by writing one more message that was almost boring in its clarity, a note to the group chat repeating that all shared accounts had been closed, that my number had changed, that any future requests for logistics or planning would be handled by professionals at standard rates, and that I looked forward to more balanced seasons ahead. Which is exactly when another notification landed that was not from any of them at all, but from an identity monitoring service I had set up earlier. A small alert about credit pulls I had not authorized in months past, and the sight of it rearranged my priorities for the next move, because if they could access my money that easily, what else had I left open that could be used without asking? And that is when I knew the next step would not be social, it would be legal, and it would change the power dynamic for good. When the credit monitoring alert arrived, I thought at first it might be a mistake, some automated glitch pulling up old data, but once I logged in and traced the history, I saw my name attached to inquiries and authorizations that were not mine. Little fingerprints of carelessness that carried my signature without my consent, and in that moment the entire narrative of me being paranoid or dramatic collapsed, because here was the proof that what I had suspected all along was not a story I told myself in anger, but a reality that lived in hard numbers and digital records, and nothing can twist that kind of evidence into something softer. I sat at my desk and printed every page, highlighting dates and balances, and I noticed how the pattern matched perfectly with the family's rhythms. Little bumps in my credit history that aligned with sudden upgrades my brother boasted about or medical bills my parents had somehow managed without mentioning where the money came from. And I understood in a way that hit me like a cold wave that my willingness to leave doors unlocked had been treated as permission, and my silence had been weaponized into opportunity. That was the afternoon I decided not to handle things with conversations, because conversations in my family meant hours of circular logic where words like sacrifice and loyalty were used as tools to corner me into giving in. So instead, I went where emotion had no leverage and paper carried all the weight, and I began the tedious but satisfying process of closing every access point that had my name but not my control. I froze my credit with all 3 bureaus, removed myself from every account where I was merely an authorized user, and changed passwords with a precision that made me feel more secure with each keystroke. I even replaced the lock on my own apartment door, because why not cover every opening when the pattern had been to assume what was mine was free to share? In the middle of this administrative purge, my grandmother Evelyn called me, not with confusion but with clarity, because she had noticed too many small things over the years and finally wanted to set them right. She asked me to bring over her paperwork, the medical directives and insurance forms, and as we sat together at her kitchen table, she confessed she was tired of being carted from one appointment to another by people who barely listened to the doctors and who used her prescriptions as another chore to hand off on me. She looked me straight in the eye and said she trusted me to manage her care, but only if I promised not to let anyone else turn it into another unpaid job that drained me without acknowledgement. We reviewed everything carefully, line by line, and when I realized that years ago she had named me as her medical agent, but the rest of the family had carried on as if that document did not exist, I felt the same steadiness I had felt when I ported my phone number. This was not a fight anymore. This was a matter of record. With her full consent and her lucid signature, we updated her HIPAA releases, secured her advance directive, and established a paid aid rotation so that no one could toss her into my calendar as if she were a spare package needing delivery. For once, her finances would not be the family wallet, and her choices would not be repackaged as obligations for me to fulfill. Once the legal dust settled with her, I returned to my own pile and organized a small claims case for the unpaid reimbursements that I had been tracking for years. It was not about the money so much as the principle, the undeniable statement that this debt was real, documented, and owed. I attached screenshots of texts where my mother promised to pay me back, receipts that showed my card used for groceries before family holidays, and line items for transportation that had been brushed off with the phrase, "You were going that way anyway." I assembled it all into a neat file, ready to be served the very week they returned from their luxury vacation, and I knew deep down that the timing alone would rattle them more than the total, because they expected me to greet them with a smile and a casserole, not a court date. That evening, as I sorted through documents, I received a calendar invite from Hannah, the fiancée, with the subject line "Quick chat before they get back," and while part of me hesitated, unsure if I wanted to be pulled into another circle of family politics, the note attached caught my attention. She wrote that she needed to tell me something about the trip, and her tone carried the weight of someone who had crossed from polite bystander to reluctant witness. I knew immediately this was not about trivial details or souvenirs. This was about the quiet structures beneath the surface, the very things I was just starting to expose with paperwork. I accepted the invite and closed my laptop, sitting for a long time in the silence of my apartment, realizing that every step I had taken in the past week had moved me further from being their fallback and closer to being someone who no longer feared what they would say behind my back. And, while I did not yet know what Hannah wanted to reveal, I understood one thing with perfect clarity. If information was coming my way, it was because the truth was heavy enough to spill over, and once it did, I would not be the one caught drowning in it. By the time I went to bed, the file for small claims was complete, the locks were changed, the credit was frozen, and Evelyn's care was legally secured. For the first time in years, I felt like I had my own life in my hands instead of carrying everyone else's, and I fell asleep not with dread about the confrontation that was coming, but with the calm certainty that I had shifted the balance. Because when drama meets paper, paper wins every time. And the next day, I would learn just how much that truth was about to matter. When I joined Hannah's call, I expected something surface level, maybe an awkward apology for not speaking up sooner or some detail about how my brother had annoyed her on the trip, but the second she started talking, I knew she had crossed a line that most people in my family never dared to cross, because her voice carried that strained edge of someone who has seen too much and can no longer keep the secret without choking on it. She told me she had discovered where part of the money for the luxury trip had come from, and when I asked if it was a loan or some kind of travel reward points, she shook her head and said it was worse. The money had been pulled from a family account, one that my parents had always described as a leftover education fund in my name. A fund I had long ago stopped asking about because every time I raised the subject they brushed me off with lines about how it was complicated, how there were taxes involved, or how it had already been redirected for family emergencies. I felt my stomach drop because I remembered being promised that fund during my college years when I was working shifts to cover what scholarships and loans did not, and I had accepted their explanations that it was locked up or better saved for grad school. Hearing Hannah describe how Robert casually referred to it as the Paris account while booking upgrades on flights and hotels made me realize that the truth had been in front of me for years, only dressed up in careful language to keep me compliant. They had not forgotten me by accident. They had erased me by design. Hannah admitted she only stumbled on it because she overheard a conversation in which Diane laughed about how I was so resilient and could always take care of herself, which had become their justification for draining funds meant for me and redirecting them to Chase's life milestones. She had screenshots of text exchanges where my mother framed me as the child who never needs anything, while Chase was the one who needs support to thrive, and as she forwarded them to me, I felt something shift inside me. A click of gears that aligned all the half-truths and evasions I had swallowed for decades into a single pattern of exploitation. I did not yell at Hannah or collapse into tears. I thanked her for telling me the truth, and then I opened the folder on my laptop that already contained my invoices, receipts, and small claims documents. I added her screenshots, saved the metadata, and created a new section titled Education Fund Misuse. I did not need to embellish it because the evidence spoke louder than any speech I could ever make. For years they had painted me as bitter for even raising the subject, but now I had proof that their generosity to Chase had been financed by theft from me. That night, instead of calling my parents in fury, I wrote a single email. It was stripped of emotion and read more like a lawyer's draft than a daughter's complaint. I wrote, "I am aware of the education fund withdrawals. I have documented statements and messages confirming the usage. I am prepared to add this to the current case or resolve it through a separate agreement in writing. I will not discuss this by phone." The act of sending it felt like stepping into a new identity, one where I no longer begged for scraps of acknowledgement, but demanded recognition through official channels. The fallout was immediate. Within hours, I received a barrage of messages, not with explanations or apologies, but with attempts to redirect the conversation. Diane accused Hannah of stirring trouble. Robert wrote a single line, "You are misinterpreting the situation." Chase tried to call repeatedly, leaving voicemails about how family money is everyone's money and how I should not be so cold. But none of them addressed the actual fact that the fund existed in my name and had been drained for their convenience. Their silence on that detail told me everything. I knew I had to widen the gap further if I wanted this leverage to hold. So when Chase's engagement weekend came around, and my parents expected me to show up smiling and supportive despite everything, I did the opposite. I sent a brief, factual message to the extended family. I will not be attending. I am unavailable and resetting boundaries. Please reach out to Diane and Robert for event details. It was not emotional, not accusatory, but it left a crater because it forced them to answer questions they had always kept behind closed doors. For the first time, I was not the buffer between their choices and the wider family's perception. At the same time, I pushed the legal process forward. I filed the small claims action and scheduled service for the exact morning their plane was due to land. I wanted them to step back into reality, not with souvenirs and stories, but with a court summons waiting on the kitchen table. When the process server confirmed delivery, I allowed myself a moment of stillness, because it was the clearest symbol yet that the rules had changed. Later that evening, Robert broke his silence with a terse email that read only, "You would not dare." I stared at the words for a moment, and then typed back, "I already did." That reply, 10 characters long, contained the sum of years of swallowed frustration, unpaid debts, and forced silence. It was not rage. It was finality. As I closed my laptop, I realized that the thing Hannah had told me was not just a revelation about stolen money, but a test of how I would respond. In the past, I might have confronted them with tears or begged for them to see my side, but this time I let the documents, the courts, and the silence do the talking. Because when a family builds its image on secrets, the most devastating act of revenge is not shouting the truth, but making it official, traceable, and impossible to spin. And in that moment, with the summons served and the evidence secured, I understood that I had taken away their most powerful tool, the ability to define the story. Now it was my turn to set the record, and nothing terrifies people who thrive on control more than losing their monopoly on the narrative. The trip was over, but the reckoning had only just begun. By the time their flight tracker showed the little plane icon inching toward home, I had already finished the work that mattered, because while they were curating champagne photos and captions about memories for a lifetime, I was building something far less photogenic and far more permanent. A structure made of account closures, notarized forms, scheduled hearings, and a path forward that did not require anyone's permission. And it felt almost strange to realize how quietly a life can change. When you stop arguing with people who treat your generosity like a faucet they own and start turning the valves yourself with steady hands and no speeches. The first move was simple in appearance, but seismic in effect. Since I packed a neat box containing every spare key that had ever given someone the right to walk into my space and rearrange my boundaries under the excuse of helping or checking or dropping something off, and I placed the box in a padded envelope with a printed receipt that listed each key, each original handoff date, and the note that access had been revoked as of that morning, then I left it inside their porch parcel locker, with a small delivery confirmation slip, because sometimes the only language that lands with people who love control is the kind that arrives with tracking numbers and needs no reply. Next came the shift with Evelyn, who, after years of being treated like the family's collective project, sat with me across a plain office desk at a community that was close to my new job and built for dignity rather than optics. And we went through every page they provided without rush or pressure, and she initialed where she wanted and declined where she did not, and when the staff asked who would be the primary contact, she said my name with a calm that told me she had not only chosen this arrangement but had chosen me, not as a beast of burden or default caretaker, but as the person who listened, planned, and respected her. And we left with a timeline that did not rely on my mother's moods or my father's schedule or my brother's bouts of sudden generosity. I had also accepted an offer for a position that my mother once mocked as beneath me when I was hunting for something stable, steady, and boring in the best sense of the word. Because this job came with health insurance that did not require me to call in favors, a manager who believed in calendars rather than chaos, and the kind of predictable hours that allow a person to build a life. And when I signed the offer letter and sent the onboarding documents, I felt a click inside that was not triumphal so much as deeply sane, as if I had finally stopped bleeding time and energy into a pit that had no bottom. The small claims case moved along with the indifferent momentum of court systems that do not care about family narratives, which suited me fine, since I wanted process, not performance, and when the notice with the hearing date arrived, I filed a short request for a written statement of decision so there would be no backroom reinterpretations of what was owed and why, and then I emailed a settlement proposal that required reimbursement documented by the invoice I had already shared. A written acknowledgement of the misuse of the education fund, and a simple apology addressed to Evelyn for treating her resources like a slush pool for family theatrics. And I offered in return to sign a mutual non-disparagement agreement that would keep everyone from spinning lies at barbecues or church or wherever else reputations get laundered, because I was not interested in humiliation or spectacle. I wanted closure with teeth. When their plane finally landed and phones reconnected, the group thread lit up with messages that sounded like a chorus of smoke alarms, shrill and repetitive and not actually useful, and I let them stack without touching a single one. Since my phone now routed unknown numbers straight to voicemail and filtered the rest by contact lists I controlled, and instead I sent a single text to both parents that read, in plain language and without venom, that all access had been revoked, all shared accounts were closed, all future communication would be in writing, and if they were willing to repair anything, I would meet them with a mediator present, which is when the onslaught shifted from volume to guilt, from outrage to nostalgia, from wounded tones about family bonds to sideways accusations about Hannah's influence, and even a last-ditch attempt to pull in extended relatives as referees, none of which moved me an inch, because once you accept that love does not require the sacrifice of your credit score, your weekends, and your sanity, the old tug-of-war loses its power. There was one moment that almost made me laugh, which arrived as a long voice message from my father gently explaining that money for the trip had come from a family pot that benefited everyone, and that the details were too complicated for texts or emails, which he suggested we discuss privately without outside interference, and I listened to the entire thing as if I were reviewing the audio of a customer service call. Then I saved the file to my evidence folder with a label that included the date and a single-sentence summary, because you do not rebut a script like that with tears or raised voices. You answer it with exhibits and timelines and a record that no one can erase by denying the conversation ever happened. I spent that evening not arguing, not scrolling, not composing speeches, but cooking an uncomplicated dinner and reviewing the list of new hire onboarding tasks. And then I cleared space in my closet and set a box on the floor for things that belonged to another version of me, like the set of cheerful dish towels my mother bought as a consolation prize the year she forgot my birthday, and then insisted that a Sunday family dinner counted as a celebration, and as I placed them in the box, I felt the softness of the fabric and the sharpness of the memory, and I realized I did not need to keep objects that asked me to remember gratitude for crumbs. The next morning I woke to a single voicemail from an unknown number that I recognized by cadence before the words even formed, because Chase does not do silence well, and his voice, when it came, was not the expected explosion but something quieter that sat somewhere between confusion and recognition. And he said that everything had gotten out of hand and that he never meant for the account in my name to be used that way, and that he thought I had more than I let on, and that our parents always told him I did not need help because I was so capable, and he ended by saying he thought I might be right about some things and that he wished we could talk when no one else was listening, and I let the message play to the end without deciding whether to call back, because not every open door needs to be walked through the moment it appears. So when people ask me what I mean by the sentence I keep repeating, that by the time they returned I was no longer there, I tell them it means exactly what it sounds like and nothing metaphorical at all. Since I was not there on their utility accounts or their phone plan or their spare keyring or their calendar, and I was not there inside the role of the good daughter who smooths over their choices with unpaid labor and a forced smile, and I was not there in the story where love is measured by how much I am willing to swallow, because I had built a different story with documents and dates and decisions that held even when their narratives tried to pull me back, and whether they accept those terms or not is no longer my emergency. I chose the kind of victory that does not require a winner's speech or an audience that claps at the right time, because the win was not them saying sorry with perfect phrasing or paying every cent with a grand gesture. The win was me designing a life where their ability to harm me is limited by structures they do not control, where my grandmother is protected by the paperwork she endorsed with a clear mind, and where my work, my hours, my name, and my peace are no longer collateral for someone else's parade. And if that sounds cold to people who love a tidy moral, they can keep their tidy moral and I will keep my keys, my credit, my calendar, and the simple relief of not being owned by a script I did not write.